Hey guys, Sam Miller from Panhandle Precision. Today I'm going to show you how I mount a scope on my long-range precision rifles. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to mount this Bushnell Elite Tactical XRS-2 on my competition gun, the new 260. This will be the first scope this year that I'm going to do a review on, so I'm going to run it real hard on my competition rifle and see how it shakes out. Okay, so the first thing we need is to gather all of our tools and all of our parts and pieces to make this work. Now the XRS-2 is a 4.5 to 30 by 50 scope. It has a 34 millimeter tube. So I went with the rings that I have the most experience with, and that's Night Force ultralights. And I know from a lot of experience that the 1-inch one is going to get me right where I want to be with the scope height. So I'm going to have enough clearance for the objective lens, the bell there between the barrel, and it'll get me as low as I can possibly get on the rifle. Some other things you need to think about are a level. We're obviously going to put some kind of a level on the scope to look at it. My first choice is a ring cap level made by Defensive Edge. However, I can't use it on the scope because this quick throw lever that they put on here sits right up at top, at 12 o'clock position at 20 power, which is exactly where I'm probably going to be most of the time, where I need that level the most. So even if I take this extension off, there's a boss sticking up, and it's just not going to give me the visibility I need on my level. So my second choice is going to be this accuracy first scope level, and this just clamps right onto the tube of the scope. Now some of the other things we're going to need some kind of a level to level the gun off, to level the scope off so that we can set our scope level. Other things we're going to need are a T15 Torx wrench, and that's for the ring cap screws. We're going to need something for our cross bolts, so that's a 1/2 inch, so we'll probably be using a socket for that. The accuracy first level uses a 7/64 hex key. Can you believe that? Okay, one of the other things I really like, it's pretty cheap and I've used it a lot now, is this Wheeler Manufacturing. This is the Fat Wrench Firearm Accurizing Torque System. And all it is it's just a torque screwdriver basically, so you can adjust the amount of torque that you put on all these screws. I've used that for a long time now. I don't know exactly how accurate it is, but it's accurate enough and it's repeatable. So I recommend that if you don't want to break the bank buying an inch-pound torque wrench. Okay, some of the levels you can use are just a cheapo torpedo level like this. This is pretty effective. This is a extreme hardcore gear. They're now called precision hardcore gear, but this is the level that they sell, and it's just a really heavy block with a level in the middle of it. And then my personal favorite is just this chunk of tool steel that Bob Carlock put together for me. It's really handy. It's a perfectly flat piece of tool steel, and it has a bubble level hot glued to the end of it. This is what I'm going to use to set this rifle up. I will show you how you can use these other levels, but this is the one that I use the most. Okay, first thing you have to do is figure out how all this stuff is going to fit. So you need to think about ring spacing as it relates to where the scope's going to sit on the rifle, because we have to have the correct amount of eye relief to make this all work. I already rehearsed this, so I know right where I'm going, but I'll just throw something in here real quick for you to think about. This Surgeon Action has a built-in Picatinny rail. It's built right into the receiver, and it ends right at the front of the receiver. So it's only the length of this receiver. So it's coming up a little bit shorter than ideal, I think, for a first focal plane scope. So a first focal plane scope has a really short front tube and a relatively long back tube. So what I'm ending up having to do is get that right up against the turret housing to give myself enough eye relief. It works though. Anyway, get it all figured out, figure out where, roughly where you're going to have it for eye relief. And then I try to get the rings spaced out as evenly as I can and try to span as much of that rail as I can. So I have it to the max right now. I can't really change anything without moving this ring forward, and there's really no reason to do that because I want as much of that rail as I can grab, as much space between that rail so that the scope is supported across as much length as I can get it. Anyway, so once we get that figured out, that's where I have to be. So if I don't have enough eye relief, I'm kind of hosed. I'm going to have to come up with a different system. Then the next thing I'm going to do is figure out where I'm going to put this. I haven't decided if I want to use it back here or if I want to try it up forward like this. It depends on how your eyes are, I guess, but I might actually stick it up forward like this in front of everything and see how it works out. Okay, now that we've identified where our rings have to be, what I'm going to do, and Normally what I would do is I would push the whole thing forward, so I'd push the bottoms of these rings towards the front or the back edge of the next rail slot or the boss. What I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to push it back so it settles in behind there. And the reason for that is I don't want it overhanging the rail. So now I'm going to torque this with the fat wrench to 65 inch-pounds. And then I'm going to push this one forward so that it's resting up against the next rail. And I'm going to torque it to 65 inch-pounds. Okay, the next question is probably, do you lap rings? And if so, how do you do it? I don't lap rings. So we're not even going to mess with that. What we're going to do now is we're going to put our scope in place. We're going to let it sit there. And we're going to try to figure out, let's put it right about there to start for our eye relief. And we'll rough level that, just eyeball it. Now I'm going to put my ring caps on. I just want to barely finger tighten these. What I want to be able to do is move the scope around a little bit, but not have it fall off. Okay, so you just want the scope to be able to move just a little bit in those rings. You don't want to scratch it up and gouge it and everything, but you want it to be tight enough that it doesn't move by itself. The next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to go prone on the ground, and I'm going to look through the scope and see if the eye relief is going to work for me. I recommend that you do this at whatever power you're going to be shooting the gun mostly at when you're shooting prone. When you shoot it at lower power and you have it mounted up, shooting offhand or in a sitting position or whatever, you have a little more leeway on how you can mount the gun. When you're laying prone on the ground, you don't want to have to try to pull the gun into you or stretch your neck out or stretch your neck back to try to get the right eye relief. So I set these up so that it's right on the money where I want it when I'm shooting prone. So anyway, I'll go do that real quick and we'll be right back. Okay, so we have our eye relief set as well as I can get it. I would have liked a little more forward eye relief, but I think I'll be okay. The next step is, since we've moved the rifle, we're going to have to re-level the gun itself. So I have my favorite tool here. This is just that piece of tool steel with a bubble level on it. And I'm going to lay that right on the rail. And I'm just going to torque the gun until I get it where I want it. And you could do this a couple different ways. You can put this in a vise. You can put this in one of those gun vices, those tipped-in gun vices. I usually just use the bipod in a rear bag. Alright, I like that right there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this level up to the bottom of the turret housing. So the opposite side of this, where there is no turret in the way, it's just a flat boss in the bottom of the scope body. And the reason I do that is all the guts of the scope are based off the squareness of that turret housing. So our lead screw, our reticle, all that stuff is squared up to this to the scope body basically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that right on the flat of that. And you see how that level sticks out. And I'm just going to rotate it by grabbing a hold of the windage turret until we're level. Then I'm just going to keep that in place. I'm just going to run a couple of these screws down a little bit, opposite of each other. And I'm going to double check it. And that'll keep the scope from moving on us. So I'll show you in a second why I think it's a better way to level it off on the bottom of the turret housing than it is on top of this turret. Okay, let's take a look at why I recommend going off the bottom of the housing like that. I had to move the gun, so I'm going to confirm that my receiver, the top of my receiver, is level. So now I'm going to come back up and check my turret housing at the bottom. And we can see that's level. Now I'm going to come up to my turret on top and just lay the level there. You can see how it's biased off towards the right now. Now if I turn the turret cap, let's just go 90 degrees there. Now it's pretty level. So let's go another 90 degrees. Now it's biased off towards the left. And I'll bet you if we go another 90, so it's pointing to the right there on that arrow, we're pretty close to center again. The problem is how the turret attaches to the guts inside. The top of it isn't always going to be perfectly level. And this isn't just this scope. In fact, the first place I ever saw it was on a Nightforce NXS. It was really bad. I mean, it was terrible. It was way off one way or the other. So I learned this from Bob Carlock at Defensive Edge. This is how they set all their scopes up on the rifles that they build. And I've done this with about a half dozen scopes now, and it works very well. So I recommend going off the bottom of the turret housing here because it is a perfectly flat surface, and I think that's what all of the guts inside the scope are going off of. So your reticle is going to be square to it, your lead screw for your turret is going to be square to it, for the erector, everything is square to the bottom of that turret housing. So it just seems like a logical place to put this level. Okay, let's recap this a little bit. Remember, we took the cross bolts and the bottoms of the caps here. I pulled the front one towards the rear, and I pushed the back one towards the front before I torqued those down. Then I laid the scope in, then I put the ring caps on and lightly tightened those, and then I set my eye relief on the ground. Now we've gone through and we've leveled the whole thing off. I've finger tightened a few screws just to keep it in place. So I'm going to confirm that everything is still level. Looks good. So I'm going to take my fat wrench here and I'm going to set it to 25 inch-pounds because that's what Nightforce recommends for their screws. And if you're wondering, I don't put Loctite on these. And I put them in dry. No oil whatsoever. What we're going to do is we're just going to go and do a cross pattern here so that we don't rotate the scope at all by tightening one side down faster than the other. I'm going to try to do all this without getting in front of the camera. So I just go by and just do like an X pattern here. Then I'm going to look for a click. I have never run Loctite on any of these screws, and I've never had one loosen, ever. For that matter, with the rails that you have to bolt down on top of the receivers, I don't run Loctite on those either. I've never had one loosen. Remember, this is a T15 Torx. All right, so we have that torqued down. So now we're going to double check. Looks good. Okay, this is the most important step of this entire process, and that's setting up our level, our scope level, so that it is perfectly plumb with our turret, our lead screw, and our reticle. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that this turret housing is squared up and level with the small level, and then I'm going to set this level to exactly match it. So that's good. Then we're going to rotate this without moving the gun, obviously. And then it's easiest to do this from the same view that you're going to be looking at the level. And the trick is figuring out how to tighten the screw without moving it, because it's going to want to rotate that level. Takes a little trial and error usually. All right, that looks pretty good. So I'll set the camera up so you guys get a good look at that. Okay, so you can see that the level out in front that you can see on the left-hand side of the elevation turret, that is the accuracy first scope level. And you can see the egg, it's a little ceramic egg inside the tube itself is perfectly straight up and down. Our reticle is perfectly straight up and down. Our turret housing is perfectly level now, so everything is lined up. You can see I wanted to use the ring cap level, and that's the one right here that I have sitting on top of the scope, but because of this quick throw lever I wouldn't be able to see it. The thing I like about that ring cap level is that it's ambidextrous, so if Jake wants to shoot the gun, he's a lefty, so he'll be able to reference off the bubble easy. The problem with the accuracy first is you have to pick one or the other. The good news is they did finally start offering them for left-handed shooters, but since this gun is primarily for me to shoot, I don't mind having it on the left-hand side. In fact, when you're on the gun and you have your eye in the scope and you're actually looking at the target, you can shift the focus to your weak side eye, or my left eye in that case, and actually see that level without moving your head at all away from the scope. So it's not such a bad thing to use this accuracy first level. Alright, so in the end this is a pretty robust system. I went back and made sure all my ring cap screws were torqued 25 inch-pounds. I'll show you what I can do with this system. I can actually unbolt this. Remove the whole thing as a unit and then put it right back in the same spot. And from my experience of testing scopes and whatnot, I'll be able to take this on and off, put it back and forth, and it won't lose more than a click of zero, if at all. .65 inch-pounds on those cross bolts. We're all good to go. So it looks like we have a peeping Tom out here. I actually had to kick that cat out of the shop. She was so obnoxious while I was trying to make this video. But anyway, this is how I do this on the bench. This is how I mount a scope. It's pretty simple. I like to keep things simple. The next step will be to do a tall target on this scope, tall target test. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a piece of cardboard up and I'm going to run it up to 10, 15 mils. This is a mil scope. I'm going to run the line up, and what I'll do is I'll take a level and I'll just mark a line on that piece of cardboard or whatever I'm using, and I'll make sure, number one, that when I look at that line, my reticle is perfectly plumb to it while my level is perfectly level, so lined up in the middle. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure as I dial the scope that all the impacts run right up that line. That's why we do all this, is so that we can make sure that when we're taking a shot and we're correcting for it across a canyon or something, that we are actually giving it all the correction it needs to offset gravity. If you're offset to the right or the left, you aren't, number one, you aren't going to give it as much correction as you would normally give, because some of it's coming off to the right, and number two, you're actually going to be dialing off to the right, so you're going to be hitting to the right or the left of the target depending on which way you're off. But anyway, this is pretty easy to do. It's easier to see if you hang a plumb line and look at the plumb line and think about gravity. Once you do that, this stuff just comes right to you and you see why you have to do this. But anyway, I like to confirm on a plumb line, but I haven't had to adjust anything in a long time. Actually, the thing I'm going to do before I do all that plumb line stuff and shoot it up the line is I'm going to zero this scope. So a real easy way to get on paper that I've found is to take the bolt out, prop this up on a target. You can do it at 50 yards, but I like to just do it at 100. And I put a big orange sticky target paster thing on the target on a, just a nice new piece of paper and a nice new piece of cardboard around it. And I put that orange sticker right in the middle of it, and then I put the gun on the ground just like it is now, bipod rear bag, and I lay down and I look through the bore. You got to take the bolt out, look through the bore, and line up the bore with that orange dot. Once that orange dot's lined up in the bore, without moving the gun, look through the scope. You'll see where the crosshairs are in relation to the center or wherever you put that orange dot. Now when you see it, if it's off to the left, you're going to have to dial to the left. because you're actually going to move the reticle. The reticle is going to move to the right when you dial the scope to the left. So you're probably going to move the scope or the gun a little bit when you do that, but you want to move in the same direction that it's off. And then you're going to re-verify it. You're going to look through the bore until you get it pretty close to center on that dot, and then just fire a shot. And you're going to be pretty close. I guarantee you'll be on target if you do it that way. Now remember, we have a 20-minute rail here built into this receiver. So right off the bat, I'm going to dial the scope all the way up, and then I'm going to dial it all the way down. I'm going to see how much travel the scope has. I'm going to come to 0, and then I'm going to dial down enough to offset that 20 minutes of angle. And that's going to put me pretty close to my elevation at least. Other than that, I'll bet you I can have this scope zeroed inside of 3 shots. Alright guys, that's it on my scope mounting procedure. Look for the review on this Bushnell XRS2. Looks like a pretty nice scope. I'm looking forward to trying it out. We'll be using this for the remainder of this reloading series on this rifle, so you'll see it a lot. But anyway, don't overthink this whole scope mounting thing. It's not that complicated. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.